The books in today's video are children's stories featuring topics such as abduction, death by freezing, being raised for slaughter, and fatal greed. Should children even be reading these? Hello everyone and welcome back to the Looking Glass World. My name is Aradhna Matthews and today we are looking at 5 children's stories that are shockingly dark. At number 5, we have The Giving Tree, which at first glance seems to be a very simple and sweet story about a little boy and a tree. So in the beginning of the story, the boy and the tree form a very close bond and play together and have a lovely time. But as the boy grows older, he loses interest in the tree. Now the tree doesn't want to lose the boy, so it offers the boy whatever he wants so that the boy will come back and stay with the tree. And as the boy grows older and older, he keeps demanding more and more and more from the tree until he finally becomes an old man, and now all that's left of the tree is a stump. But the story ends with the tree being very, very happy because that boy, now an old man, has come back. Does this sound a little off? This is not a story of triumph and friendship. It's a story of one entity completely destroying another with sheer greed. At number 4, we have Charlotte's Web. I remember reading this as a child, and it's a very sweet story overall about a little pig named Wilbur who is adopted by a girl on a farm named Fern, and he becomes her companion, her pet, and she takes care of him. He grows older and outgrows the home, ends up living the rest of his life on a farm where he befriends a very wise spider named Charlotte. Now, one of the defining plot points of the story is a constant threat of death. Wilbur grows up on a farm. There's a lot of death on farms. There's this whole understanding the balance between the animals and the humans. And there are a lot of moments of panic in Wilbur's life as he has to confront death in its many forms. And Charlotte, the spider, is actually a very key character who helps Wilbur come to terms with the fact that death is very natural and it's nothing to be afraid of. The death bit itself actually wasn't so much of a problem for me. Even as a kid, the story tells it in a way that makes it feel like it's not something to be afraid of, which I think is great. But what really set me off, and I remember thinking this even then, is that this presence of death that Wilbur is always around comes from within his own home. First of all, he gets introduced to this human family when Fern, the little girl who adopts him, actually saves him from being killed by her father, who was going to kill Wilbur because he was the runt of the litter. So that's death scare number 1. Then Fern takes him in, adopts Wilbur, takes good care of him. He grows up very loved, but then he becomes too big for the house. So once again, maybe not a death threat, but kind of a potential death threat, which is Wilbur has to leave. Where will he go? And the father again is saying, we're going to sell Wilbur. And once again, Fern has to step in and say, that's not right. So they come to the solution of sending Wilbur to a relative's farm where they know he will be treated well and Charlotte can go visit him whenever she wants. So that's threat number 2. Threat number 3 is once at that farm, Wilbur realizes that he is being fed and fattened up for slaughter. I remember feeling very afraid for Wilbur because these people were his family, so to speak. They took him in, they raised him, and every death threat that he faces in his life comes from his own family. That is messed up. If anything, I came out of this book thinking, I love Charlotte and Fern, but I really can't trust anyone. Definitely fueled some of my trust issues as an adult, I'm pretty sure. At number 3, we have The Little Prince, which again, at face value, is a very sweet and simple story. So the narrator is a person who finds himself stranded in the desert, and he comes across a little boy with golden hair, and they start to have a conversation. And as they keep talking, the boy tells the narrator that he is actually not from Earth. He lives on a little asteroid where he tended to a little garden and had a life of his own there. And then he decided to explore the universe. And then he too wants to go back home. So the narrator and the boy spend all this time together. And in the end, the boy decides to go home and doesn't tell the narrator what's happening. The narrator finds out that the boy has spoken to a snake and told the snake to bite him. And the story of the boy ends with a snake biting him and the boy collapsing. Now, before this happened, the narrator kind of got a gist of what the boy was planning and tried to talk him out of it. But the boy says, don't think of this as death. It's just that my body is too heavy to fly home with me or something like that. So don't be sad. The story concludes in a somewhat open-ended way where the narrator then sees the boy collapsing after getting bitten by a snake, and then returns to that spot later to try and find the body, only he can't find the body. So this open-endedness gives the reader some hope in the sense that if you don't want to take the darker approach of death, you can also interpret it as the boy finally going home and his spirit is in his home and all of that. What makes the story heavier than I think a children's book should be is the overwhelming loneliness. I remember when I read this, the boy as a character really broke my heart. He's this little child, lives all alone on this asteroid, travels all over the place but has no friends, desperate to go back home in the end. It's just loneliness and sadness throughout. And overall, I just felt like it was very, very heavy. So the two remaining books were very closely matched, and it took me some time to decide which to put in number 1 and which to put in number 2. And I settled on this one for number 2 because it is very, very obviously too morbid in my mind to be classified as a children's story. And this is the story called The Little Match Girl. The story begins with a little girl selling matches on the street on New Year's Eve. It's freezing cold, there's snow everywhere, her feet are purple and blue. Everyone's celebrating the new year in their warm homes, but this girl doesn't want to go home yet because she has not sold any matchsticks yet, and if she doesn't and goes back home, her father will beat her. And the cold keeps getting worse and worse and worse until the girl decides to light a match to get a little bit of warmth at least. And as soon as she lights that first match, she's transported to a scene that she imagines of her being not on the street, but in one of these warm homes and celebrating New Year's Eve like everyone else. But the second the match stops burning, that vision disappears. So she keeps lighting matches so that she can live in that moment where her life is warm and happy. And eventually, she burns out all the matches and freezes to death. I mean, it's pretty obvious why this one made it to the list. At number 1, we have Coraline. Coraline made it to the number 1 spot over The Little Match Girl because, like I said, The Little Match Girl is very morbid outright. It's dark from start to finish. Whereas Coraline kind of toes the line between something that could be a sort of spooky but entertaining read and something that is just dark and disturbing. I looked online and I found a description of the genre of this book given as children's horror. Basically, the story is about a girl called Coraline who is living with her 2 parents, and one day these parents go missing and Coraline tries to find them. She finds this pathway into a sort of alternate or parallel universe. So everything looks exactly the same, her house looks the same, the people in that world are the same, but not. So there are certain stark personality differences between her world and this world, but most obviously the difference is every person in this alternative universe has buttons for eyes, which is thoroughly spooky. Coraline has to navigate this eerie world that is real but doesn't seem real to try and find her parents, and she finds along the way the other world's version of her parents, so the doppelganger parents who have buttons for eyes, and they're trying their best to convince Coraline to stay with them. But obviously something doesn't feel right, and these other parents are clearly plotting something dangerous and dark. Yikes! There's nothing in this that is outrightly horrible or gruesome or morbid, but there is this continuous presence that is just a little bit too unsettling, and it really sinks into your skin, which is why I place this at number one, because it's the stuff we don't understand that scares us the most. And this book is just unsettling. Not to mention, it feeds right back into the same trust issues that we had with Charlotte's Web, which is people who look like your parents but aren't your parents. Who can you trust? By the way, this was like a recurring nightmare of mine as a child. And with that, we come to the end of my list of 5 children's stories that are quite dark, considering the genre that they've been placed in. Have you read any children's books that you think are just way too dark or heavy? Let me know in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want to read short, interesting articles, make sure you check out my website at aradhanamatthews.com, or you can visit our Instagram community at The Looking Glass World. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.